Today is the fourth webinar in our series of webinars on the use of the CalServe Gateway. Today's webinar is on use of the gateway for documenting your control operations, and this is really fertile ground for a lot of you to ask questions of your data. A lot of you for a long time have been entering surveillance information from your mosquito collections, your mosquito pools, sentinel chickens, other aspects of your surveillance. And what we'd like to do more with the control side is have the spatial and temporal details so you can ask questions of your surveillance data related to your control data. So when you do control, what's the impact on the mosquito population or the virus activity, for example? So we do have agencies using these pesticide application modules now. Right now, there are 4 main agencies using it, all of whom happen to be in the Sacramento Valley, which might be due to the influence of some of our power users like Peter Von Crude here. And we've had meetings with Colusa and Bernie Basin and Sutter Yuba. And so those agencies are all using it. It's Shasta, Sutter Yuba, Bernie Basin, and Colusa, who are all using this regularly now. And so they've helped us work out a number of the little kinks in the program that always come with new users. So we really appreciate their use of the system. They're also allowing me to use their data today for the webinar. So like the past webinars, I'll be interacting with real agency data, but doing it on the sandbox so there's no risk to anyone's data during the session today. So I'll be interacting as a user as if I'm in these agencies. So with that, I'll get started. You can see my gateway interface right now. This is, again, the sandbox version. You see the message at the top that lets you know that that resets every weekend. The sandbox populates with your real agency's data. In this case, I'm going to not log in as myself. I'll be this example user. And when I log in, I see the usual gateway modules. You can see what agency I'm in. So right now, I'm pretending I'm in Colusa Mosquito Abatement District's agency. So I'll start off with the application module, which is where we'll spend almost all of our time today. We've talked about all the other modules in previous weeks. Here we see that if I click on application, there are a number of choices, as there are with the other modules. We have configuration, where we do need to do some initial setup if you haven't done that already. And then we have the ability to add and manage sources, as well as our applications, which is, of course, the end result, where you apply pesticide somewhere and you need to document that in space and time. So I'll step through each of those modules in sequence, starting initially with the configuration. So I'll just click on config. That shows you the different configuration options. So just going down the list, I'll show you for equipment. You can see you've got new and manage. So if you have existing equipment, you can click on manage equipment. If you have new equipment that you want to add to the system, that's the way to do that. So throughout the gateway, you have new and manage choices for many of the options in the gateway, all of which work very similarly. Same for technicians. We can add a new technician, or we can manage our existing technicians. And for mixes, which is your particular mixes of registered products, you can add new ones or manage your existing ones. So starting with equipment, I'll just have a look here for equipment to see what's registered already in my agency, which again is Colusa. And you can see every agency right now has some default equipment. Those are just big picture categories like aircraft, backpack, hand fogger, things like that that are really really coarse in terms of the details. If you look at the manage equipment for Colusa, you can see they've gone into additional details. So they've actually gone to the trouble to document their individual pieces of equipment. Here we have different foggers, I believe this is. So we have fogger number 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. I talked to Dave Weitzel, and he was telling me this corresponds to the year they started using those, or the year they were made. I think these are custom made by the agency. That's perfectly fine. So this can be any amount of detail that your agency wants to record. If you want it very coarse-grained and you just need to know that that's a fogger, that's fine. If you want to know which piece of equipment it is, for example, to document hours of use of that equipment, you can go to all the detail you want to go. So they've done that here. I'll just click on edit to show you what that looks like. So when I click on edit, they custom make this, so presumably it does not have a serial number unless they invent one. They have their local code for this, so that's the identifier their agency uses to reference this piece of equipment. The manufacturer is their agency in this case. If that's a commercial manufacturer, you can do that as well. Model number, serial number if there is one, totally up to you to put that or not put that, and then you can write out a description of what that is. So this is an ultra low volume cold fogger. Go back to manage equipment. You can modify those at any time. And then I'll click on add new equipment, which is just the same interface. So I won't go through, well, maybe I will. So I'll say we're going to add a new one, number 8. You can put any piece of information you like in this code. So that's something that should be familiar to your agency. So I'll say number 8 is ULV fogger, and you could put something like custom, just to let you know that's not a commercial product. I'll say CMAD for Calusa MAD, model 2008, if I made it then, and so on. Just put some text there to describe the equipment. Add new equipment. As with everything else in the gateway, it confirms with a green banner that the equipment was created successfully. And then if I go back to the configuration options, I can check that out. So manage equipment. I should now have down here at the bottom this new one I just added. So number 8, ULV fogger. You can sort those by the code, so that sorts it right after number 7. Works the same as most of the other modules. If you have a lot of equipment documented, you can, as usual, change the number of pieces shown on each page. Here we don't have that problem, so they're all fitting on one page. Going back to configuration, the next step is to go to technicians. So I'll click on manage technicians. This gives you a list of people registered in the agency. This is not cross-checked really with anything. These certification numbers are always up to you to maintain. That's related to your agency's continuing education. So if you want to keep a document that has the relationship between who applied the pesticide and what their certification number is, it's good to keep those updated. Here in Calusa, clearly they have 3 people who do most of the pesticide applications. And really for our system, unlike continuing education, the thing that matters most is your permit number for your agency to apply pesticide in your county, and I'll show you more about that later. These numbers for individual technicians can be whatever makes sense to you. I think by default we've populated those with the numbers from the CE database originally, but as time goes on, you may need to populate those yourselves, because we just set that up with everybody who existed at that time, and you can keep adding those as you go. If people retire or leave your agency, you can also mark them accordingly. Really, in the database, it's not super important that you keep that up to date, although we could revisit that if you see need to do that. If you add a new technician, of course, that works very similarly. So you just put first name, last name, and then that certification number. So you have to put something, but it can be any number that makes sense to you. And then I'll just go back to configuration. And the final piece is one of the most important pieces and takes you a little bit of time to do it right. And that is your mixes. So I'll just go into new mix. And you want to give this a code. So this would be something that makes sense to you. So this will be like ULV mix number 6, and then you can put other information if there's something that needs to be in there, like what product is in it. I'll say permethrin, just not knowing what else to put. Oops, sorry. Okay, and then you could write out a text description of that if you wanted. And then you've got to put in a registered product. So here's where you've got access to all of the registered products for California, so you could start typing something and it will auto-complete for you. So let's see what we have. If I start typing permethrin, it's searching on all of the registered product names and pulling up anything that has permethrin in the name. So let's say, okay, it says Everside, technical insecticide, maybe not. I'll just pick this, permethrin 10% rapid kill insecticide concentrate. That's going into this mix. And really what's important here is you've got a product and you've got a potential diluent if you're going to add a diluent to that product. So that's what a mix is. It could be just product if there's no diluent, or you can add a diluent. So here I'm going to put, just for example, let's say we're going to mix a gallon of this, and I'm going to put, and I admit I'm no expert on pesticide concentrations, so apologies if anything makes no sense to some of you, but I'm going to say I'm going to put 32 fluid ounces of this insecticide concentrate with 96 ounces of, 96 ounces of water, and that makes a gallon. So I'm going to mix those at a 1-to-3 ratio to dilute this product. When I click Add New Mix, it creates it successfully. Let's go back to Manage Mixes. And what that will show me is a list of all of my different mixes documented in my agency. So here I've got the whole range of possibilities here. These are some the agency actually has defined, and then my artificial one here. If I click on Edit, that will remind me of what's in that mix. And at that point, that should be a known entity to your people. So whoever's going to enter and apply these pesticides, that should be some mix that you use locally. If I had not put a diluent, of course, it's going to just assume this is straight product. So however much of the product I say I applied, it's all that registered product. That gives us the ability later, when you say you applied a certain amount of this mix, to back out how much of the registered product you actually used. So in this case, because I've got 1 part registered product and 3 parts water, if I later apply a gallon of that product, the system will automatically know that, hey, it's only 32 ounces of the registered product, and it'll report that accordingly. All right, so that's pretty much all there is to it. You just need that initial setup of the equipment, the technicians, and the mixes. The equipment's pretty big picture. Technicians kind of similar, where that should just be the people who apply pesticides with or without their accurate certification numbers at the moment. And then you really need to get the mixes right. That's the most important part, to really scrutinize the details and make sure these ratios of registered product to diluent are correct. Okay, so that's that. So initial configuration is done. The next piece you'll probably want to visit would be the sources. This is very similar to the idea of surveillance sites, although a little broader. So sources are the places to which you'll apply pesticides. So let's say manage sources, and this will show you for Colusa. And then these are the different sources they've defined. So here I'll go, for example, to the Colusa National Wildlife Refuge. So let's say edit that source so I can have a look. That lets you go and see where that is in space. So here I'm going to go out to the Colusa National Wildlife Refuge. This is the boundary that they've defined for that source. So when they apply pesticide in this area, it's in this known spatial location. You can see it here on Google Maps. You can see the name there that should be recognizable to your agency. And similar to surveillance sites, you have to start with a surveillance source, or a pesticide or mosquito source code. So that can be a large number of digits. I believe we allow 10 here, but in this case, it's number 8. That may or may not matter to your agency, so you can just give it a number. What's more important is this name. So that should be recognizable to your agency, just like surveillance site names are very important. So give it a source name that's important to your agency. The other thing they've done here that's kind of a nice thing is adding WOTUS, which is Waters of the U.S. So that way they could easily filter any data later on Waters of the U.S. to find all the sources that represent Waters of the U.S. Under the Clean Water Act, a lot of you now have to provide those reports, or I guess all of you have to provide those reports for applications to Waters of the U.S. This makes that easy. So you can see that sources that are Waters of the U.S. should be checked accordingly. One of the questions we've gotten is, why can't we just map Waters of the U.S. so that you know whether it's a water of the U.S. or not? The problem with that is that Waters of the U.S. are defined really only in legal language. So it's really up to you to determine what waters of the U.S. are. Clearly, in this case, Colusa has decided that this National Wildlife Refuge is a water of the U.S., which is, I believe the legal language is something along the lines of anything that drains into a larger water body, like a river in this case. And if the water ends up somewhere where people would care about it, it's a water of the U.S. So you would need to know what the legal definition of that is, and you decide on a source-by-source basis what a water of the U.S. would be. As long as you've got that checked appropriately, later on we will know that and be able to dump that in an annual report for you. You can export the data anytime, as with anything else. If you're revising the source, let's say I'm making a change to that source, I could do that and then make revision comments that say why I'm changing it. For example, if let's say the refuge sold a piece of property and cut down the size of the refuge or expanded, you might want to pull that to another area, and then you can make a revision comment. If you're just fixing it, let's say you realize, oh, I made a mistake in my boundaries, you can check this box to say, hey, I'm making a correction. This is not me moving the source. That works very similarly to surveillance sites, and when you do that, you update the source, and then that will fix that in the system. Here I didn't make a correction, so let's see what, okay, so it updated it successfully. I didn't actually change anything, so that's all fine. Okay, so if I go back to, well, let's show you new source. I'll just create one as well. And it's warning me that if I leave anything unsaved on that page will not apply. So let's go over to Shasta. So what I've done here, and this is an example of agencies sharing that's not real because I'm in the sandbox and I got the permission of the agencies to use their data, so that's why I'm bouncing back and forth. But what you can see is my user actually has access to 3 agencies' data. That's because under the hood, I have this user that actually exists in Colusa, and I'm acting as agency manager there. But Shasta and Sutter Yuba are agencies that are sharing access to their data with my user. So you can see it lists me as user type for Shasta and Sutter Yuba, and then I'm an agency manager for Colusa. Any of you can do that if you want to share not just pesticide data, but any sort of gateway data. You can provide view only or user access to a neighboring user. For the purposes of today's webinar, just so the agencies involved aren't alarmed, they've given me permission to use their data, and I'm acting as a user in these agencies, but I'm not actually making any changes, and this all goes away at the end of the week. So for the purposes of the webinar, I'm a temporary interloper in their data. So I'm flipping over to Shasta. I'm going to create a new site or a new source, for Shasta. Just like for surveillance sites, you can always see the codes you've used, and you can see the codes that are still available. So here I can see, okay, I've got 1 to 3, 5 to 6. You can see the ones that have been used disappearing from the available range. So I'll just start with 1 because that's easy. Just type 1 and it fills out the zeros for you to make that a whole number with all the zeros required by the system. Let's say I want to put this site at an area along the Sacramento River. You can see it's already kind of zoomed in on the agency's area here. Let's say I'm going to put it here at this Wind River Resort, somewhere near that. So let's call it Wind River Resort and Casino. That will help users of the system know what that is. Let's see, and let's say I had my own local agency code. So for whatever reason, Shasta uses ABC 1, 2, 3, kind of 3 letters, 3 numbers to represent the sources. That would be fine, so I'll work that into the code. You could do like Colusa did and put some designation that that's a water of the U.S. Okay, at this moment, I don't really know what the Wind River Resort and Casino's address is, so let's leave that alone for the moment. I know it's in Redding. And of course, it already knows from my agency, United States, State California, County Shasta. And now I need some help here. So I'm going to mark it as a water of the U.S. Now I'm going to zoom in here. And so I know that casino is there. Let me click on it. Okay, so that gives me the address. So as a secondary data point, it's not a bad idea to put in the address, although it's not required. I'll put that in just to be complete here. Okay, and then I also get the zip code from Google, so let's put that in. All right, so that's all fine. Now I'm not going to spray the casino itself, so let me zoom in here, and I'm looking at Google Maps, which is not, it helps me get to the casino. It's not super helpful to define a source as I'm thinking of it. So let me flip over to the satellite. I still see where the casino is, but my problem with, in my agency, let's say, is that the people here at the casino are complaining about the mosquitoes in this river corridor here. So here I've got Clear Creek just next to the casino. Let's say I've got some seepage areas here that have mosquito issues along the margin of the river. What you want to do is go in with one of your tools here, and either you could do it as a point, where if you're literally putting it at a point source, you can just drop a dot on the map. You can do it as a polygon, which is an area on the map, or you could do it as a line. So for a ditch, for example, you might just want to draw a line along a corridor. In this case, I do actually want to apply to this area, so I'm going to go in and just draw a boundary around this entire area. And you can be as detailed as you want. For the sake of the webinar, I'm being a little quick. But here now I've drawn this whole polygon that represents this trouble spot that's right next to the casino. So anytime I apply to this source, I'll know it's in this spatial area. So I could use that for GIS type queries later, all sorts of different things I can do with it. It's going to have this nice name with it where I'll know what that is. If you know the address, of course, you can use geocode to go to the right place on the map. Here I did that in reverse. All right, and then I'm going to click Add New Source. Again, I'm in the sandbox, no risk to the data, but it confirms the new source has been created successfully. It has code 1. So if I go to Manage Sources now, here's the list of sources. So you can see it has a default 0, which just is the area. Let's see, I'm forgetting what that looks like. So that's just a dot in Shasta County. That's for kind of an unknown source, presumably. And then I'll go to Manage Sources, leave because I didn't mean to change anything here. And you can see that source I just created along with all of the other sources in the agency. So here you can see for the ones the agency has created directly on the gateway, you can see a delete option. If it existed because of another source, so we may have imported these from, or Peter might have imported them at Shasta from other software, it's got edit capabilities, but not offering the delete option. And you can see there's a lot of sources. So by default, it's showing 25 per page, and there's 382 pages of 25 sources per page. That sounds crazy if users are going to go in and click all of those sources and draw all of those sources in Google Maps. There are ways to import sources into our system. So just know if you already have all these data in GIS format, it's pretty easy to move them over into our system. We might need to work with you if there's some need to massage the data into the right format. In the previous webinar, I covered the import specification, which also includes these sources. So lots and lots of sources. Just to show you another example, so here's one that the agency actually created, site number or source number 4. I'll click on Edit just to go check it out. This is an example of a point location. So here, instead of having a polygon like I just drew along the river, and now I have a point. So here, Sugarloaf Lane in Reading, it has unknown, so I could fix that. That's probably just something that wasn't marked when it was created, so I could say Shasta. You can look at the map. You're thinking, well, that's not super helpful as you're zoomed in, but zooming out shows you where that is. You can also flip over to satellite view. So a lot of times point locations would be things like swimming pools. I don't know that that's what that was, but that could easily have been a place where they went out and did drop mosquito fish in a swimming pool, for example, if that pool was green at some point. So looking better in that picture, but that's just the Google Maps picture, of course. So that's the kind of thing you can do. You define the point location of the source. You can define line locations for things like ditches. And just save those to the system. Here I'll just update the source, which means I added the county, I guess, in this case. I should have marked that as a correction, but I didn't. Okay, so source has been updated successfully. didn't change the location in that case. Okay, now moving on. Once you have all of your sources created for your routine sites, it's not necessary to create literally every place you'll apply pesticides in your agency, because you do those one-off responses to service requests. Maybe you drop in mosquito fish or apply some sort of larvicide at a particular property that you don't expect to go back to routinely. That's perfectly fine to just do those one-off applications directly in the application module. So with that, I'll move over to applications. So again, we have new and manage. So I'll start by just creating a new application. And I'll switch over just for the sake of moving around in different agencies and showing you different agencies' use. I'll flip over to Sutter-Yuba. They're another one of our users that have a lot of data starting last year. So from the start of 2019, their data are in the system. Let's say I'm going to go create an application to a particular source. So there's a lot of different options in here. So just as in the other part of the gateway for sites, you can filter on any piece of this information. So here I see there's a site called Sierra Gold. So instead of just going to pick that, I could have started typing the word gold, and anything with gold in it will show up. So here I'll say I'm going to apply to the Sierra Gold location, which is a bad option because maybe it's in the ocean. Let's try something else. That's another, I mean, we're working on that as we go, but occasionally there will be things that aren't in the right place, and we can help with that. We are working on the issues related to that, where we can help you figure out where those are and fix them. Okay, so here's Gold River Drive. So here I can zoom in. This is a point location as well. If you want to see the satellite, you can see the satellite. I'll flip back over to the map, so that just confirms where it is. I need to give a purpose. So let's say it's adulticide in this case. And then technician can be, let's say Joe Songer. And then I can go to my menu for equipment. So here's an example of, they've added their own codes, so 100, 200, 300, 400 for different applicators. Let's say it's handheld ULV in a backyard, for example. The mix would be one of the ones the agency has defined. So here's a whole list of those. I'll just say duet. Here, once it knows the mix, one thing to know about mixes is it knows whether that mix is defined in terms of liquid volume or weight. So you have to be consistent with that. So once I pick that mix, let's see what I have for options for the units. So now I'm seeing liquid, so duets and liquid. So here I only have liquid options. The one we haven't forced is each. So if you have something like briquettes, those are a little tricky for us because they could be specified maybe in terms of total weight or how many units you applied if you're dropping larger briquettes into a source. So each usually appears as an option no matter what. And then above that, I have my liquid units. So let's say it's duet. I'm actually applying, let's say 1 ounce. So 1 fluid ounce here. What's the area? So if I'm doing that to something like a swimming pool, I think most of you don't measure the area of the swimming pool when you're there. Obviously they have strange shapes and things like that. So let's say I'm going to put in 1/10 of an acre. So you need some sort of default, usually for very small sources like that. You have to put in some kind of value for area because it matters in terms of rates of application that the amount you're applying matches the area to which you're applying it. So things like ditches that are pretty linear need some kind of area measurement, as well as things like swimming pools that are really points. Containers, anything like that where you're putting pesticide, just give it an area that makes sense given whatever you're applying it to. We also record time. So unlike for the surveillance collections at the moment, we actually record the start and the stop time. So you'll see a date. You can either type that date or as usual, you can go put it in on the calendar. So let's say I started it last night. You're probably not doing this in a yard, but again, let me take a few liberties with how you would actually do things here. And so here I'll say I started 11 o'clock last night because somebody let me into their yard and were really urgently wanting their mosquitoes dealt with. One of the most common issues or errors, I'll say, with entry of applications is this one. So let's say I started at 11 p.m. Usually this is adult control in natural areas or around barrier treatments around the town. But if you enter a certain date at 11 p.m., the most common mistake is to go down here and say, well, you go down to the bottom of the list, and I think the last one is 11:45 at night. And so you go back to the top and you pick midnight. Now, the problem with this, and this is on us, we need to do a little bit of error checking here, is that I have the same date, but I said 11 o'clock, and now I'm going to midnight on the same day, which actually means the night before. So actually I have negative 23 hours here, and so the end is before the start in this case. So it's something to be careful about at the moment. We need to get an error check in there because it's something we discovered as we were preparing for this webinar. But in this case, I would actually want that to be the next day. So here I'm going to create a treatment that started on June 1st at 11 p.m., ended on June 2nd at midnight. So I'll add that new application. Okay, application was created successfully. Let's go over to manage applications. And this is where this list can get quite huge. So there's a lot of filters you can apply. So here I'm going to just, let's say I want to see all of 2019 for Sutter Yuba. And then if you wanted to see only for a particular source, you could do that. I'm just going to click change filters because I want to see the whole year. So it's going to dump those out here. And depending on how many you have, that could take, a few seconds at least. You see all the information for all of those treatments. I can sort it by date. So it started on April 8th. You can sort it the other way. It ended on December 5th. You can see Duet, handheld ULV. You get a view, quick at-a-glance view of all of these things. You could sort by source, sort by mix, anything you want to sort by. You can also go in and fix anything that needs to be fixed by clicking Edit. If you didn't mean to create something and you note an error, you can go delete those. And you can see here, there's 171 pages of 25 per page. You can show them all on one page. I won't do that because that gets a little crazy, but here's doing it 100 per page. There's still 43 pages. So it takes a while to filter through all of that, obviously. But that's how you can go back and find any particular application. If I want to see, let's say, all uses of Duet 1 to 18, let's go check that out. So change filters. So this is all of my applications with Duet 1 to 18 in 2019. So that filters all of those for you. You can quickly, there's 50 pages, so clearly that's a common product that's used often in their agency. It's also very useful if you want to see by technician, any other way you want to stratify those data, you can filter them here. All right, and then just to show you one more new application, let's say I'm going to go create one to a new source, and I'll just flip over to Shasta here, or actually, let me go back to Colusa. All right, and let's say I'm in the town of Colusa and I'm going to do a particular treatment around the edge of town. I could do that by, if you want to just bypass the source choice, if it's not to a registered source, you can just start drawing. So here I'm going to draw a line. So let's say I'm doing some kind of barrier treatment along the edge of town. So I'm not drawing this super well, but let's say I'm going to drive a truck along this area. So let's say I'm doing a barrier treatment to the town of Colusa. Once I double click, that means I'm done. I drew that in. You notice when I started drawing that, it says one-time source. So it knows that. You don't have to pick anything up here. You just start drawing on the map and it creates that line. And then in this case, I'm doing adult deciding. Technician, let's say Dave Weitzel's out there doing this at night. And then let's see what he's got for mixes here, or sorry, equipment. Let's see, I'll do this latest piece of equipment. He's going to apply Duet. Say he's going to do something like a gallon. Now here's where you have to give that an area. So lines have no area by definition, so he's going to have to decide what the appropriate, let's say the drift is this direction, so he's going to have to decide what is the appropriate definition of the area for that treatment. So I'll say there's like a 300-foot swath width, and somehow I did the calculation and found that to be something like 30 acres. You can do it in square feet. You can do it in hectares if you so choose. I'm going to do 30 acres. I don't actually know what that is, so that may not make a lot of sense. That's probably way over label rate, so maybe I better cut that down a bit. Let's see, I think, let's say 60 ounces on 30 acres. That's probably a decent label rate. And then, again, put the dates. Here I'm going to just say he started at 10. Okay, this is in today, so he couldn't have done it in the future necessarily. And if you truly put it on a future date, it's going to warn you about that. It won't let you put collections into the future. They have to be actually completed when you put them in the system. So here I'm saying he did it last night from 10 to 11. Click Add New Application. All right, application created successfully. So now all of my applications are in the system, let's say. And for California, and this is a little difficult for us to deal with across state boundaries, but we may try if other states want to implement something for their reporting. But we also allow for submitting your pesticide use report through our system. So flipping over here to pesticide use reports, you can see you have two options. You have the settings, which are the initial setup things to do, and then you have the submissions themselves. So here I'm going to go to settings and check that out. So for every county that your agency covers, you need some settings if you're going to do the reporting through our system, which is ideal if the data are in there. Here you see County Colusa says send, so this is asking on what day of the month do you want to send the report. So if I go to edit, you'll see what the settings are. So here I have County Colusa, I've got the permit number for this agency, so that's registered with the County Ag Commissioner in the state, so they know who that is. And then you can check the box if you want your report to send automatically. And of course, if you do that, it's on you to make sure that your pesticide use is all documented in the system ahead of that date. So Colusa has theirs set to auto send on the 9th day of the month. So 9th day of every month, our system tries to submit to the Cal Ag Permits system using this information on behalf of Colusa. Just for the sake of comparison, I'm going to go to Sutter-Yuba, which happens to be a 2-county agency. And if I look at that one, I see two entries. So if your agency applies to 2 or more counties, it's perfectly fine to put in each county. When I look at those, they each have their own unique permit number. So Sutter-Yuba's applications to Sutter County have a certain permit number. You can see they do not do the auto send, so they actually have a person who goes and looks at it and submits the report. And then the same for Yuba County, and you'll notice it's a different permit number. So if for every county you'll need your own permit number. You can manage this and update at any time. Our system then uses that to connect to the Cal Ag Permits system under the hood. It uses their web services, so we really don't even know this is happening either. So it's up to you to either do it manually or you can set it up to auto send. And those obviously have to be correct for the report to go through successfully. All right, so once you've set that up for any counties to which you report, you can go to the submissions, and that's really where the action is. Here for Sutter-Yuba, you can see for each month of this year, they have through April so far. They submitted that on May 8th, and here's Sutter and Yuba's different reports. You can view those anytime by just clicking on View. That pops up with the report that you all know and love, I'm sure, and submit those. In the old days, I think you used to fax them to your county ag commissioner or email them. Now you do it through Cal Ag Permits, which is the online system for doing this. Our system just does that same exact process. It has the EPA registration numbers. It's got how many applications, total units, that it's for public health or rights of way or whatever your purpose is, and then also the area treated. So it's all your reported information. It gives you a nice printable version. Let me go back, and then you can also click print. and that pops up with a print module. Click print. This is January, so less exciting, obviously, but that gives you a nice paginated version for printing. And you can put that in a file or give it to someone, whatever you need to do with that. You can see these also all say submitted. So that means the report's gone. You don't need to worry about it. It's in the system. Cal Ag Permits accepted it. I'll show you what it looks like if you get errors. And sometimes the errors are fine, as in the case I'm about to show you. So I'll flip over to Calusa. And they don't apply pesticides in the winter. So let me, so far this year, the applications will start in April, or in May, I'm sorry. So you'll actually see that change over the year. I'm going to flip to 2019 just to show you the variation. So here, for example, in 2019, Calusa started using pesticides in May. There were no applications in this month. It's set to auto send, which doesn't mean anything necessarily goes without them knowing. It just tries to send on the 9th of January, and nothing happened, or in this case, the 9th of February, it's submitting the January report. If I view that, there's nothing. There's no application, so that's why it failed. So one thing, I went to Jody and said, why is our system giving an error? And he said, well, our system's not giving an error. The system is reporting to you what Cal Ag Permits said. So from their web services, it returns this error, which is perfectly fine in this case because Calusa actually didn't do any application. So that's exactly what should appear at the start of each year. So you can leave those there. There's no harm done. Nothing got transmitted. And just leave it alone. You can see once they actually did applications, they all look fine. They all say submitted. So the ones that still say submit means those haven't been submitted and it got returned with these errors. When they say submitted, that means it went out appropriately, was recorded appropriately, and as I mentioned before, they set it to go on the 9th of every month. So on the 9th of every month during 2019, and in this case, this is December, which got sent on January 9th of 2020. Those were successfully transmitted to the Cal Ag Permit system. If for the record they want to go check those out, they can do that anytime. So they just go see that here. It's also a great way to scan for errors. I know Mark Novak at CDPH does reviews of these data. This is also a great way for the agency to see any discrepancies. If you see crazy volume numbers or crazy area numbers, that can mean there's a zero off somewhere. Mark's found lots of those errors over history. So we hope this will be a way to help avoid some of those in the future. All right, now I want to give you a couple of examples of data use, and this is something that's a priority for us this year. We've got a few early season things we've been dealing with just to get the year off right, including these webinars. But one of our goals this year is to help you make use of these data. One thing we haven't done enough of is give you the tools that make it fun to have your data in here, I'll say. So we'll let you ask more questions of your data as the year goes on. Let me bring up an example. So let me show you in the gateway first what I'm doing. So under tools, as always, I can go export data. And here if I go, let's say I'm in Calusa and I want to export applications. You can also export your sources if you wanted to. Applications, export. And then you've got some filters. In my case, I have artificial access to 3 agencies at the moment. Let's say I want Calusa's. I want to take all the applications from 2019. So I could just go back to January 2019, January 1st. I'll just type this next one to speed it up. Okay. Okay, now you can filter that. Let's say you wanted only applications to waters of the U.S. You could do that. That's certainly useful for like your end of year reporting. In this case, I'm just going to dump everything. So I'll say export data. And then that gives you a quick file that you can unzip. This looks very similar to what you've seen me do in last webinars. So if I click that file, that's going to unzip an Excel file in that case. And then I'm just going to go over and show you what that looks like in the interest of time. So here I've already opened that file. So what you get is a massive spreadsheet. Here I've saved it as a CSV just so I can use it in GIS software as well. Actually, let me flip to the Excel file. That would be, yeah, this one. Okay, so this is the Excel file. That's the same thing. Here I've got descriptions, I've got products, I've got all sorts of information here that I might want to use. In this case, let's see. Okay, and in this case, I want to know, for example, I talked to Dave Weitzel about prepping for this webinar, and he said, well, one thing he finds useful about the way they register their equipment in detail is that then he can ask questions about how many hours that piece of equipment got used. So all I did over here is create a field that has to do with hours. So to do that, you could just say equals, and then you take the end time, in this case, minus the start time. That returns a value in days, so I'm going to say times 24 to give me hours, and I hit enter. So that calculated value says that that's 0.5 hours. I can copy that formula all the way down. That will calculate hours for every row in this spreadsheet, which is every application I did. What that gives you the power to do is then create a pivot table. So then I would just highlight all of these data. So I'm going to highlight this entire data sheet and then click Insert Pivot Table. And so when I do that, it's going to say, well, do you want to create a new worksheet, or do you want to create, put it in an existing worksheet? You can leave that at the defaults. Say OK. I'm creating a new one. I've already done this, but I'll do it again. So I'm going to pull this over so you can see what I'm doing. I'm going to zoom in on the sheet a little bit so you can also see what I'm doing here. So let's say I want to summarize the hours in 2019 that each piece of equipment was used. I'm going to just take equipment and I'm going to drop it here in the rows. Okay, and you can see it populated over here with my equipment. And I want to know how many hours I use that equipment. So let's drop my new calculated hours field in here. And you can see it creates a sum of the hours. So that tells me for each piece of equipment how many hours I used that equipment last year. So it gives you a sense of the balance. Maybe there's equipment getting underused because they have their favorites, or maybe it's not in good repair, or whatever that would be. It gives you a quick summary of that. Might also be useful. Let's say I want to uncheck hours. I want to keep hours. I want to uncheck equipment. So I don't want to do it by equipment anymore. I want to do it by technician. If you want to know how many hours your technician spent applying pesticides, you get that here. So it dumps out the summary of the technicians here and how many hours they spent. You can see Weitzel's not only not working, he's working negative hours. So that actually is indicative of that problem I think I was talking about, where like midnight the night before actually can. So Dave's probably working a lot of late hours. Is probably what it is. And Dave, if you're listening, I know you'll find that funny. But anyway, so if you get negative hours, that's a good indicator that you might have that problem of some midnights getting applied to the same day such that it's actually negative hours. Okay, so that's the example of ways you can use this. You can also stratify it any other way you want. Like if you want to know by source how much product you've used, you could drop, sorry, not equipment. I didn't mean to do that. You can also drop source names. That'll tell you how many hours you've spent at each source. You could, if you don't want that, and you want the sums of some of your quantities, you can drop that in here. If you want to know how many acres, you can, I don't mean to belabor this, but like you could drop in area. That'll give you a sum of the area. So that's how many acre treatments you've done. So that's how many acres times the treatments you've done. So lots of ways you can summarize your own data. And just as a final example, I wanted to show you how you can use this in GIS software. So I'm going to go over to QGIS. I'm going to use the same data. And one thing, let me go back and I'll show you this. But so here you see that it also dumps the shape. So that looks crazy for most users because you're not going to be able to read that. So that shape is telling software in a text-based format it's got this really long set of longitude, latitude, longitude, latitude. That's a text representation of all the points that form the border of that polygon. You don't really need to worry about that except to know that that shape is actually recorded in a way that you can make use of it in GIS software. So that's what's called a well-known text representation of the shapes to which you applied pesticide. Here I'm going to go over to QGIS, which is free software. You can go download it right now if you want at qgis.org. I'm going to, for example, let's say I want a base map initially. So I've got my quick map services that allow me to add a base map. So here I'm just going to put in my OpenStreetMap here, just standard base map that goes to the whole world. I'm doing this in Calusa, so let's zoom in. Well, let me grab my hand to move the map over. All right, so now I'm in Calusa, so that gives me a nice little base map to look at. The next thing I want to do is add my data, which is the more interesting part. So I'm going to click here to add a data source. I need to go find that file. So here's that CSV file that I downloaded with my applications. It knows, because it's .csv, it knows it's comma-separated values. You can leave that alone. I think by default, what you'll see is this. So most software, it'll just show you all this information. Again, you see that shape there that has all those latitude and longitude coordinates in there. So the next thing you've got to do is give it a geometry definition. So QGIS knows to look for that. And so in a text file, it looks around for that. You can see it's already figured that out. It knows that shape is my geometry field. It says it's well-known text, which it realizes that that's just a string of text down here for this value. Geometry type, you can tell it or just let it detect it. It will know from that, so I'm just going to let it detect. And then the CRS, in this case, usually just pick WGS 84, which just means this is in latitude, longitude coordinates. If you used a different coordinate system, you could, but our system outputs these things in WGS 84. So I think anything exported from the gateway, you should use this one. The code for that is 4326 if you need to know it. All right, and that's it. So I really just say add. It'll take it just a second. I've added it. You see it appeared in the background, so I'm going to close this dialog. And you can see that gave me a rendition of all the applications in Calusa County. It's got borders for the sources. You can click on the info button. So what's really fun about this is if you want to see all the sources, let's label them first of all. Go to properties. Let's see, labels. I want to say single labels, source name, apply. I might be a little crazy because I have a lot of sources. I didn't think about that, but there's a lot of overlap. Essentially, it has a polygon for every time I apply a pesticide. So it's going to be a lot of overlapping labels, but there are the labels. So you can see as I zoom in, it keeps rendering that. I'll give it just a second longer to label those. Okay, so you here see Waters of the U.S., Calusa NWR, Waters of the U.S., Highway 20 North. So I'm going to click on one of those. So in this case, Calusa National Wildlife Refuge. And what you see is it pops up with a list of all the applications I did for that export. In this case, I only exported for 2019. So these are all of my applications in 2019. So I've done it's about 11 applications, I guess. And then you can go into each one to see how much of the product, how many acres, and you can work with it that way. So you can do analysis of your own. You could bring in your own surveillance data and reconcile that however you like. So it's a great way to bring the data straight into GIS software and work with it anytime you like. It also reveals things like, the borders have to be reconciled with each other. So this is another very common issue in the gateway because right now, and it's something that's also on our radar, is when you're drawing a particular source, you don't see the neighboring source. So this is a good example of that where boundaries might overlap. So the ideal way is to draw these very carefully such that they snap to each other's boundaries and don't have any overlap at all. We will be working on that this year to get you a better view of the other sources as you're defining them. You can also see there are differences like, If all you really want to know is that it was applied in a large area of your district, you can do that. Of course, that limits your ability to know exactly where it was applied within those areas. If you want to do it at very fine grain, where each source is literally a pond or ditch or some other singular source, you can do that as well.